Today's guest, Dean Karnazes, was an amazing chat. I thoroughly enjoyed getting to know this man more. He's really an icon and a legend when it comes to endurance sports as a whole, especially ultramarathon. And one of the points that I really enjoyed throughout our conversation was just diving deeper into his mindset, how he pushes through when the endurance races are insanely long or insanely difficult. This guy's literally done it all. So getting to know more about him, his personality, his mindset, his business, all of that was really interesting. So I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did, and enjoy. All right, today's guest, another podcast. We've got Dean Karnazes, ultramarathon runner, New York Times best-selling author, renowned public speaker, Badwater ultramarathon champion. Dean, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me run by.
Yeah, absolutely. So you came all the way from Greece for this.
Yeah, it was so ironic. I'm living in Greece now, and I just happened to be in Colorado for my partner's doing the Leadville Trail 100, and I get this email like, hey, you want to do an interview in Boulder? I'm like, I'm here. I can't believe it. Yeah, so it worked out. It was serendipitous.
Perfect. That's, when things just work out, they're meant to be. Yeah. So, yeah, really appreciate you carving out the time, in the taper and the travel to come down here to Boulder and for me to get to learn a little bit more about you. Your name sort of precedes you and your reputation, which is amazing, and I'm excited to learn more about your backstory and all that. But before we get into it, I'd like to start off the interviews with like a hard-hitting icebreaker question. So first one is, what is more difficult? Is it to write a book or run for 80 hours straight?
It's a good question. They're both 99% perspiration, 1% inspiration. But I think writing a book is more difficult to me, just because the finish line, running 350 miles, at least you knew where the finish line was. A book, the finish line is always shifting around. Like you're never quite sure you got it right. And to write a book well, it just takes a lot of in your own head. And I would say writing a book's more difficult. I have a lot of respect for anyone who's written a book.
Yeah, I can totally understand that. As an endurance athlete, I have no problem riding my bike for 7 hours, but like sitting down and trying to even write show notes for this episode for 2 hours or an hour, whatever it was, it takes a little bit more brain power than getting on the bike and riding over the mountain. So yeah, I'm not surprised by that, but it is good to hear.
I actually do a lot of my writing when I'm running. And that's
really?
One thing when you're cycling, things are moving a little bit quicker. You got to kind of pay more attention. But I'll go on 3 or 4 hour runs and I'll dictate into my cell phone. But I have, we have some of your clearest thoughts when you're running, and so it's kind of like multitasking. But yeah, I go running and I, wordsmith the paragraph, and I can remember sometimes 3 or 4 paragraphs.
Wow.
Yeah.
Will those be like final draft edits right off the cuff, or do you kind of go back and that's a rough idea and then you kind of gotta carve it out or edit it?
Some of the quotes are perfect.
Yeah.
Just like that is, you just think of these things and it's so profound, like, wow, that's great.
Yeah.
Other, the longer stuff needs to be trimmed a little bit.
Yeah.
Nipped and tucked.
I feel like I'm mentally the most creative when I'm out on my bike or when I'm running, and I need to start doing that. Like just not being so intense about the workout and just stopping and actually writing it down. Because even if I'm thinking about coaching, because I'm self-coached and I coach my wife Jeannie, and even whether it's preparing for this podcast, I'll come up with a great question and then I'll come home 3 hours later and it's like gone. So I'm going to take that from you. I'm going to stop and I'm going to dictate into my phone whatever my in the time I feel like an impressive thought is.
Well, motion stirs emotion.
Yeah.
So starting with we talked about this a bit before the show. I'm in Greek, and Aristotle, his pupils, his students were called the Peripatetics, the wanderers, because he taught while he was walking around Athens. He thought that you needed to move to learn, to absorb, to have creativity in your thought. You couldn't just sit idle. So
yeah, very cool. Very cool. Well, I want to go back a little bit. You've got such a impressive career, both in running and in business. I'm curious to definitely learn more about it all. I want to start off on the running side of things. How did you get into running, and why was it something that drew you in straight away? If it did.
Yeah, no, my earliest childhood recollections are running home from kindergarten. So literally when I was 5 years old, I started running home from school. I couldn't sit still. We tell young kids, sit still and pay attention. And what does every young boy want to do? Run around and not pay attention.
Yeah, for sure.
So I waited for the bell to go off and I'd run home. And I just loved running. It was something I related to the world through running. I ran competitively when I was in high school. We won the cross-country state championships when I was a freshman, and at 15 I said, that's it, I'm done. That's as far as I'll ever take my running career. So somehow graduated high school. I went to college, and then I thought I needed a graduate degree, so I went to graduate school, and I thought I needed a business degree, so I went and got an MBA and had a very comfortable corporate job in San Francisco. All the perks, the 401k matching program, healthcare, company car, stock options. And on the night of my 30th birthday, I was in a bar with my buddies doing what a lot of people do on their 30th birthday. I was, getting shit-faced on tequila. And at midnight, I told these guys I'm leaving. They said, where are you going? It's your 30th birthday. Let's have another round of tequila to celebrate. And I said, no, I'm going to run 30 miles to celebrate instead. And they looked at me and they said, but you're not a runner, you're drunk. And I said, I am, but I'm still going to do it. And I walked out of this bar. I'll never forget, I didn't even own running gear, but I had on these comfortable silk underwear, like silk boxer shorts, and I took off my pants, and I threw them down the alleyway, and I'm like, Half Moon Bay is 30 miles south of here, go. And I just ran drunkenly into the night, and somehow I survived. I mean, I ran all night, and I say I ran, but I kind of walked and hobbled and crawled, whatever, but I made it to Half Moon Bay. And I said, you know what? I hate being a corporate guy. I hate the business world. I'm going to be a runner. And I quit my job, and that was 30 years ago.
Wow. That is an awesome story. Did the buzz wear off halfway through the run and you realized what you were doing?
Yeah, what the hell are you doing? This is a really bad idea. Yeah.
And it's got to be a perfect storm of the pain, the physical pain, and then the buzz is wearing off, and you probably didn't eat enough.
Beer chafing and the blister. Oh, yeah.
Beer and tequila probably have enough carbs to get you through 30 miles.
No, I remember looking down to my left was the lights of San Francisco Airport, SFO, seeing the jets coming in, and I looked up and I saw the stars, and I don't know, heaven spoke to me. It said, this is, I've never felt this way before, but it's this is where you're meant to be at this moment in your life. This is what you're meant to be doing.
Yeah.
And I'm from that point on, it was just kind of this numb gliding to Half Moon Bay.
Yeah, that's very
I couldn't walk for a couple of weeks afterward, but yeah, different story.
That is a very interesting thing. I mean, yeah, I think about that all the time, in that the world sometimes just has a way of kind of deciding for you, and the more you force it, the less happy you become and the less you achieve. And so to kind of have that realization, even if it is a drunken night, there's probably had to be some thought process beforehand going into that, being oh, this isn't really for me, the corporate world, and I need to scratch an itch. So that's cool. I mean, talk to me a little bit about how you go from that, taking 15 years off running, getting back into it, deciding you're going to be a runner, to getting into events, having it actually become your identity. Because it's one thing to say, oh, I'm a runner now. How do you go from that to now I'm going to train and actually be a runner?
Yeah, so I remember going to Fleet Feet, this running store in San Francisco, after running 30 miles, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to be a runner now. So I bought some running shoes, and I was running 4 or 5 miles every day out to the Golden Gate Bridge, and I was passing people. No one was ever passing me. It was my pride. It's I'm passing everyone, no one's passing me. And one day I was coming home, and if you live in San Francisco, there are hills everywhere. So you got to inevitably run up a hill to get back to your house. And I was running up this hill, and these two guys just blew by me as though I was standing still. They were a different species. These were next level kind of athletes. And I thought, my God, they're so fit. How are they doing this? And I got to talk to them. And I couldn't catch up with them, and they disappeared over the ridge line. I thought, I wonder, how did they get so fit? I come up over the ridgeline, and they're doing push-ups. And I'm like, I got to talk to these guys. So they weren't very talkative, but I said, you guys training for something? And they're like, yes. I said, is it a race? Yes. I said, to one guy, are there hills involved? And he said, no, there are mountains involved. And then they got it from the push-ups. And I said, well, where's this race? What's it all about? And they're like, it's the Slayer Mountain 50. I'm like, where's it at? And they're like, it's near the Sierra Nevada. And I said, it's 50 continuous miles, or how does it work? Where are the campgrounds along the way? He's like, buddy, the gun goes off, you start running, you stop when you cross the finish line. And his friend's like, if you cross the finish line. They looked at me like, this joker, there's no way he's crossing the finish line.
Yeah.
And they blasted off. So I went to the library, did all this research, found out about this race. I went and signed up for this 50-mile race. I did this 50-mile race, and it was the most difficult thing I'd ever done in my whole life. I thought I was going to die at points. It was so brutal. And I'll never forget, I finished, and I'm in the medical tent, wrapped in this Mylar blanket, and I see these same two guys, and they're high-fiving each other, saying, we qualified. I'm thinking, well, for the insane asylum, like what the hell do you qualify? No, we qualified for the Western States 100-mile endurance run. I said, wait, twice as far? 100 miles? Like, I couldn't wrap my head around it. He's like, yeah, it starts at the base of a ski resort in Lake Tahoe. You run 100 miles through the mountains. I said, well, that's like all night. He's like, yeah, you run all night. You just put on a headlamp and you run. You cross a river. And the whole thought was so fantastic to me and so unbelievable. And the last thing he said to me as they were walking out is, hey, buddy, you qualified as well. And when he said that to me, I knew I would never for my whole life live down that moment unless I signed up for this race and tried it. I just knew at that point you have to do this race, or every day of your life you'll say you qualified and you didn't have the balls to do it.
Yeah.
So next year I did the Western States 100-mile endurance run and finished and kept going.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you went on to win Badwater, win Vermont Trail 100. You ran in Western States 11 times, was it?
13.
13, there you go. Yeah, 13 times in Western States. So obviously you got really hooked on continuing to show up to these events. In addition to that, a million solo challenges or individual challenges, including running 148 miles on the treadmill.
In Times Square.
In Times Square, okay. Well, I want to get into that.
2-story platform, yeah.
Yeah, 50 marathons, 50 states, 50 days, running for 80 hours, like I alluded to in the beginning of the podcast. Like these are all really interesting challenges. I'm curious to know from your perspective what got you more pumped up. Was it these organized events like a Badwater, like a Western States, where there's a competitive element, there's a start line, and there's a finish line? Or was it these kind of different challenges that you created on your own? And what was the impetus to even start some of these challenges that you just sort of either came up with or just did?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think I love them both equally, and I think that's kind of the yin and the yang. I like competing because it's quantifiable, and it's a course, and the thrill of competition, which spurs us to be better. But I also like conceiving these own endurance quests myself, and it started when I ran the Western States 100, and then I ran this Badwater Ultramarathon, which is 135 miles, and I thought I can go further than this, but there wasn't a race that was further. But I learned about this 200-mile, 12-person relay race, and I asked the race director, like, hey, can I just run it solo? Like, I'll be a team of one. He's like, sure, buddy, whatever. Yeah. And so I ran this 200-mile relay race solo, and I finished. And then I thought, you can come up with these events, and it's kind of exciting and thrilling in its own right. It's a little bit different than a Western States or something like that, but it has equal appeal.
Yeah.
And when I ran 50 marathons in 50 states in 50 days, that was 2006. People weren't doing this kind of stuff, but now you hear about it all the time. I mean, you got the Iron Cowboy,
sure,
which you probably know. I mean, people are doing these kind of things. It's more commonplace. But when I was first doing it, I was kind of pioneering this whole idea.
Yeah. I like the idea of doing something that you create yourself. And I got a little taste of that during the pandemic time when we were all sort of forced to create your own internal competitions or whatever. And I mean, mine was obviously on a very different scale. Like I did a one-on-one half Ironman triathlon. I did a solo 5K just for time. And I feel like I agree with you in the sense that competition definitely brings the most out of me as well. But the motivation behind those was so pure. It was really just trying to extract the most out of my own self. And I feel like that has to be part of the reason why you continue to do those solo adventures, was just trying to get the most out of yourself on the day. Is that true?
Absolutely. I mean, I remember going I was running Boston Marathon. I went to the pre-race expo, and there was a guy giving a talk, and he said, I'm part of the 50 state club. And I'm like, what is this? He said, well, I've run a marathon in all 50 states. I didn't know there was a marathon in all 50 U.S. states. And I said, how long did it take you? And he said, well, I did it pretty quickly. I did it in 18 years. I thought, I don't know if I'm going to be alive in 18 days.
Yeah.
So I thought, I wonder if you could do it in 50 straight days. And it just grew from there.
Have you always been sort of like a out-of-the-box thinker or an extreme thinker? Because I don't know if the normal person hears about 50 marathons in 50 states and immediately says, I'm going to do that in 50 days' time. Like, how does something like that pop into your brain? Or is that always just how your brain is operating?
I'm a little fucked up. Yeah,
That's a good way to put it. I like the honesty.
Anyone's going to run an ultra marathon's got something, a loose screw up there somewhere.
Sure. Yeah. A lot of endurance. I mean, I think a lot of us, to the common Joe, an Ironman or multiple Ironmans a year is crazy enough. The training that we do is probably crazy. Ultra marathon, definitely. I'm not going to beat around the bush. It's definitely a different type of wiring there, but I mean, it's definitely inspiring and it's definitely cool. I want to learn more about the training element, because I am obsessed with training and physiology and those types of things. And so I'm curious, like, once you got into it, you started doing obviously the competitions like a Badwater or Western States. Those are competitions you definitely have to train a lot for and be super physically prepared. Not to mention the fact that if you're going to run for 350 miles straight, like you can't go into that unfit or unprepared. Like, walk me through a little bit when you were in the heat of your, expedition to tackling all these events. What did the training look like?
Yeah, I mean, in preparation for the 50 marathons, 50 states in 50 days, I was doing a lot of ultra marathons. So I probably ran, I've run over 300 just regular marathons now, but I was doing regular marathons like on back-to-back weekends with like a 100-miler. So I was kind of like really increasing the volume, just overall volume, thinking, if you've got the stamina to do like 150, 250 mile, 200-mile weeks back to back, because you think about running 26 miles a day, 7 days a week, that's like a 185-mile week, for 6 weeks,
yeah, sure,
which is a lot of miles.
Yeah.
So I was working with Jason Coop of Carmichael. You might know Jason Coop. He's from Colorado, Carmichael Training Systems, and he introduced me to a training block. I mean, this is again back in 2005. I didn't know what a training block was. I mean, I was running in board shorts. Like I just would go out and run for 8 or 10 hours. So he really gave me some regimen and some focus. As I've matured, let's say, as I've aged, I've changed around my training quite a bit. I just can't handle the high mileage that I used to. So it's more high intensity.
Sure.
So doing a lot of interval training, trying to keep up with younger runners, doing some nose breathing, so kind of forced hypoxia, because I live at sea level.
Sure.
So doing a lot of nose breathing, trying to stay physically active all day is a big thing to me. So from the moment I get out of bed until the moment I go back to sleep, I try never to sit down. So I rarely do something we're both doing right now. I rarely sit down. Sure. I have my my desk I write all my books standing up. I'm bouncing around on my toes. I have this body weight HIIT training routine. It's about 12 or 14 minutes that I do constantly throughout the day. So, it's just body weight, just push-ups, pull-ups, dips, chair dips, sit-ups, burpees. And I'm cycling, like that throughout the course of the day.
Cool. Do you feel like you kind of need that to like supplement your life, or is that just as a human, or do you feel like you're doing that for training? Like every hour you're saying, I'm going to take 12 to 14 minutes to do this to improve my physical capacity to run a race? Or is it like, I need to do this to feel like I'm more productive in the day, or I'm going to be able to write more paragraphs of my book or whatever?
That's such a good question. I mean, it's pretty insightful, but I don't know. I've thought that myself. I thought, is it vanity? Like, do you just want to look ripped? Not really. No. Is it, yeah, come on. An ultra marathoner doesn't need to be doing sets of push-ups and pull-ups. I mean, most ultra marathoners are pretty skinny up, their upper body. I just feel compelled to do it. Yeah, I just feel like it makes me more complete.
Yeah, like
a better animal. Like, I'm trying to be the best animal I can be physically, and I think that to do that, we need to work our body. Yeah.
I can completely relate on a different scale, because we're all wired differently. Like, if I'm not doing what would probably be showed as an extreme training day to an average person, I feel like I've got this compulsion or like an itch that needs to be scratched. And if I haven't ridden 3 or 4 hours in the mountains that day, or done a 10-mile threshold run or whatever, like I just feel unlike myself. And I think for lifelong endurance athletes, which if you've been doing this 30 years, I've been doing it my whole life, that's just part of the DNA. It's part of the wiring, and you need that just like you need a glass of water in the morning or a cup of coffee, So I totally can relate. That training is very cool. What setbacks did you have along the way, maybe in terms of injury or something like that? Because that's something I'm going through a little bit now. And yeah, I can imagine that if you're running 150-mile weeks and multiple marathons in a row, there had to be 1 or 2 injuries along the way.
Knock on wood.
Really?
I've never had an injury.
Wow.
Yeah, I've never had an overuse injury. I can't comment on injuries.
Wow.
People ask me about injuries all the time, but I've never
Yeah.
had one, so I don't feel like I can speak from a place of authenticity.
Sure. What do you put that down to? Why do you think you've been so resilient?
I think the cross training is really important. I don't just run.
Sure.
I think that hereditary, your biomechanics, your alignment,
Sure.
is hereditary. So it's, you kind of inherit these things. They say one of the best things you can do as a long distance runner is to choose your parents well.
Sure.
So maybe you just didn't do a good job.
I think cardiovascularally, I picked amazingly.
Yeah.
Peripherally, maybe, or musculoskeletally, I probably could have improved in that department.
Yeah.
But
I was telling you earlier, I'm 100% Greek.
yeah, sure.
And my dad, insists we're from the same village as Phidippides, the original Greek marathoner. And I always tell him, Dad, we grew up in L.A. Like, what village in the hills of Greece are you talking about? I mean, we're from California.
You got that deep lineage. It goes it goes super deep. So no, that's cool. I mean, I think if you're just blessed with that could be your superpower. That could be your talent above all else, like the ability to just continuously stack training. That is what gets people where they want to go. I mean, that was me for 10 years of my career. It was like never injured. But yeah, interesting. You mentioned the cross training. What, in addition to maybe that like body weight, circuit that you're doing, what other cross training things are you doing to keep yourself busy?
I get in the gym once in a while, so I do some heavier weights.
Sure.
But other than that, it's just body weight. I really believe that you don't need weights. If anyone was to get down and do 50 or 60 knuckle push-ups, you'd be exhausted. Most people can't do it. You don't need much more than that. And the next day, your pecs are going to be burning. So
Sure.
I really believe in body weight. The only times I've really strained muscles in my upper body is when I'm lifting heavier weights.
Sure.
But occasionally I go into the gym, and I really push the weight around. It's like I stack up enough weight that I can only do 2 or 3 reps. There's a lot of grunting involved. But
That's the way to do it.
Yeah, yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. I'm one of the reasons I asked that is, with my background in triathlon, like I saw in your results list swimming across the San Francisco Bay, you mentioned growing up in, having your career in San Francisco. Are you much of a swimmer? And what was the impetus to swim across the bay?
Yeah, I grew up in Southern California, so I grew up surfing. From the time I can remember, I was surfing, and then it was junior lifeguards. So I'm very comfortable in the water, especially in big waves. Currents don't bother me. Swimming across the San Francisco Bay, it's pretty intense. But I have to be honest, I wore a 5'3". I wore a wetsuit, and come on, you got a little buoyancy. And I was just trying to stay mid-pack because I've seen some fish. I windsurf as well. I've seen some big fish in the San Francisco Bay. Yeah. So I didn't want to break out. I wanted to stay surrounded by a lot of other swimmers just in case.
Yeah, totally.
No, but I've done triathlons. I've done Xterras. Cool. I've done 24-hour mountain bikes. I did this one event called the Outdoor World Championships, which was in Hood River, Oregon, which was like multidiscipline. It was running, rock climbing. I also climb a bit, mountain biking, windsurfing. So I just love outdoor sports. Yeah.
That's why you don't get injured. You're just got this versatile. You're just like a multi-sport athlete to the max. That's really amazing. Cool. I want to transition a little bit into the mental side of all of these endurance challenges, because I think all endurance athletes, whether you're running a 5K and just getting into it or doing a 70.3 or a regular marathon or even getting into an ultra marathon, like during a 100-mile ultra race or something even larger, 200 miles, 350 miles, how are you either truncating that and segmenting it, or how are you just staying present in each mile? How does that process work for you?
I think that's the key, is staying present. People say to me a lot, what do you think about when it gets tough? And I think thinking is the problem. I think that just do. So when I hit the wall, the quote unquote wall, what I really try to do is not to think about anything. Put on the blinders to the next aid station or, the next mile mark or whatever. Don't reflect on the past. Just think about one thing, taking my next footstep to the best of my ability. Sure. And then my next footstep to the best of my ability. And it takes some discipline, right? Our minds are so active. even now, as we're talking, we're having a one-on-one conversation, you're thinking about what's the next question, did I turn off the lights at home, whatever. So to really focus on your next footstep, you have to be present, and you have to pull your mind into that place. And I can do that for 8 or 9 hours sometimes, especially in these longer runs where I'm just thinking about one thing, next footstep, next footstep. I'm not thinking how much further I've got to go. You know, in an Ironman, you know it's ahead of you, right? There's no mystery in this. But when you're suffering, you know, you're just looking for an out. Like, you know, where's the next aid station? Where's, you know, when's the next hash mark going to come? Whatever. If you can just tune out of that, your body is really amazing. And the human body is capable of so much more than I think we understand. But we have these self-conceived limitations we place on ourselves. And if we can just move out of the way of that, we can keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you trying to skew? I mean, you said you're not really thinking about anything. You're just trying to stay focused. Is there anything that you find yourself gravitating towards if you do to combat maybe like a negative emotion? If you're at mile 30 of a 100-mile ultra race and you think, there's no way I'm getting through 70 miles. Is there like a combative force, or are you just trying to get back to neutral, like a combative positive force?
You know, I have to say, I think experience helps a lot, because I know how bad it's been before. And so now when it gets to that place, I kind of celebrate it. I'm like,
sure,
this is fucking miserable. Have you ever been this miserable before? No, right on. This is the most miserable you've ever been. Like, this is horrible. Like, I've never felt this horrible.
Sure.
And then there's a great thrill if you can reach the finish line. Like, I overcame that. So,
totally.
You know, the next time this happens, you realize I've been here before. I got through it. You can probably get through it again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was seeing something the other day that kind of like resonated with me, and that like the human brain and the human body is programmed to seek comfort. And the minute you're constantly trying to seek that comfort, you're just always going towards that. But the celebration is in that hard moment when you kind of get your ass kicked and you are faced with a demon that you maybe haven't been faced with before, and you either, you know, take it head on, or you kind of fall back into the maybe more comfortable area. So it's cool to hear that you like are embracing that moment pretty intensely.
And there's a quote in my first book, there's magic in misery. And I think every endurance athlete understands this. I mean, when we're suffering and in pain, we're more alive than we are any other time. Yeah.
I find this especially in my training. I find it a little bit less so in the races. I think maybe it's just because what I'm doing in professional triathlon, like it's a very, like, at this point especially, it's a very mano-a-mano type thing, trying to get a win or try to get on a podium. And that's not my favorite part about it. My favorite part is going out into the mountains and pushing myself and finding that edge and that limit. And so, yeah, that's like a really cool thing. I think one thing I've been thinking about quite a lot is, as I get older, it takes maybe a little bit more to stimulate and scratch an itch of maybe thrill.
As you get older.
I've been doing this 15 years. Okay, every year.
You look young.
I'm 31, so I'm definitely not. I'm definitely not trying to paint a picture of me being elderly or anything like that.
But you got a lot of good years ahead of you. Come on.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear whether or not, for me, I want to push it 1 mile an hour faster on a downhill. I want to go 10 watts more. I want to be able to go an extra mile. For you, now having done this for 30 years, are you still searching for another thrill, another level, another bigger thing to get you that feeling?
Yeah, I mean, the thing with triathlons versus ultramarathons, you know, triathlons are pretty quantifiable. Like you said, you kind of know most courses are relatively manageable. You know, you're looking at your watch a lot. Where with an ultramarathon, there's so many variables. There's weather, there's terrain, there's climbing. Yeah. There's so many different factors that, you know, you can't compare a 50-mile race with another 50-mile race. You can't compare Badwater with another 135-mile race, because Badwater's across Death Valley in the middle of summer.
Sure.
So I jump into races all the time. Probably not a good idea, but, you know, jump into races that are 100 kilometers kind of thing, and just go for it and just see how it ends up. And like I said, I'm living most of the time now in Greece, and there's just a whole nother set of ultramarathons that are so fantastic. And it's just a different mentality than a triathlon. Like it's you know, you're going to go through historic places. There's going to be climbing. You know, there's wind. You don't have, you know, there's all kinds of elements that come, you know, contrive to stop you also to be fantastic. So
yeah.
ultramarathoning to me is just a different sort of challenge. And I still run regular marathons, especially now half marathons even, where I'm like, okay, you come on, you got to break. I don't care how tough this course is, you got to break 2 hours. You cannot go. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, when I get into the marathon distance, I'm still looking at my watch a little bit more than usual and pushing a little bit harder in that regard. It's more about competition than just pure excitement of something new.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing, and it's cool to hear the amount of variety that you are still exposing yourself to. It's not like you're just pigeonholing yourself into I'm only doing 100-mile races or I'm only doing marathons or something, because I think that's when you get a little bit burned out and you don't necessarily have that ability to say, oh, okay, I'm trying to get something different out of a 100-mile race versus a marathon. And I think that's maybe where some endurance athletes maybe get it a little bit wrong, probably myself included, where it's like, okay, here's my year. It's been the same year more or less for the last 10 years. I'm either doing half Ironmans or Ironmans. The challenge is the same. The courses are the same. The goal's the same. You just get a little bit tired of doing the same thing over and over and over. Whereas if you can do it differently, that's probably a big part of the longevity.
Yeah, I mean, I've run on all 7 continents twice, and I'm hoping to do a 3rd round. So, I mean, I've run a marathon to the South Pole. I mean, it's so much different than the triathlon world. I mean,
sure.
Venturing to Antarctica to run a marathon is so different than going to Coeur d'Alene or,
sure.
you know what I'm saying. It's a different kind of world. And within ultramarathon, I mean, there's so many new challenges I'm still excited about taking on, not just races, but like I want to run from the lowest point on Earth to the highest point on Earth. So the Badwater Ultramarathon's from the lowest point in the Western Hemisphere, which is Badwater, to the highest point in the contiguous U.S., which is Mount Whitney. I want to do the same thing, but going from the lowest point on Earth to the highest point on Earth.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what's the highest point on Earth?
Think about that question.
Everest? Is it Everest?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, and then what's the lowest point?
It's the Dead Sea in
Dead
Jordan.
Sea.
Yeah.
Wow. And
Yeah.
that has to be thousands of miles.
It's about 5,000 one way and about 3,000 the other. So
Wow.
the most direct route goes through Iraq and Iran,
Yeah.
and the U.S. State Department's saying, no,
Yeah.
Dean, you're not going through these countries. So the northern route is through through Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan. That's a longer route.
Sure.
Yeah.
And you're talking about 2,000 miles. It's not like, a
it's-
little park run.
Yeah. And, there's only a certain window you can arrive on Everest to climb it.
Sure.
I guess the good and the bad news is that window is increasing with the
Sure.
climate change. So you've got a bigger window, but you got to arrive within a certain time frame
Sure.
to be able to get to the top. So
How much of these endurance challenges, because I can see you lighting up when you're talking about some of these things, and that's inspiring to see, and it's really cool. There's a physical component to these, which is just obviously being prepared physically, mentally to run 5,000 miles or to run even 100 miles or whatever it might be. But there has to be such an intense planning and logistical side of this. Do you embrace that as well? Is that a part that you like dealing with the U.S. State Department on, or is that a bit of a nuisance?
no, I like it all. I mean, it adds another dimension. I'm,
Yeah.
like you said, I'm a business guy, and I like new challenges, both physically and pushing my comfort zone and having to learn new skill sets and navigate through different agencies and so forth. I mean, it's a little bureaucratic, but in the end, I think my approach is so out of the box. When I come to the State Department, we say, hey, I want to run through Iran. They're like, hold it, we've never had that request before.
Yeah, totally.
But the other ironic thing is that I've mentioned this on various podcasts, and there is a huge running community, especially in Iran, that has said, no, you're not going around our country. We're going to meet you at the border. We're going to surround you with 100 runners. We're going to put you up every night.
Yeah.
We run just like you, and we want you coming through our country.
Cool.
So, yeah.
That's amazing. Do you feel like you have like your brand or your name and your likeness has afforded you some opportunities like that going forward now?
Yeah, I mean, runners are supportive people, I think, in general, and we're kind of kindred spirits, right?
Sure.
I mean, shared suffering brings people together, so
Totally.
we know what it's like to suffer, and we support each other.
Yeah.
And across the world, there are runners. I mean, it's a universality that we all share.
Yeah.
There's so many things in this world that divide us, right? The color of our skin, the God we worship, our language. But running unites us. It's one thing that brings us together because we all do it the same way. We put one foot in front of the other, and we run. So even if people don't speak the same language, even if their socioeconomic level is nowhere close to mine in either direction. When we start running, we're equal. We're the same. Yeah,
totally. That's very cool. And I would love one day to transition into a little bit of that, because I've been all over the world doing triathlons, and I would love to experience it through a different light. And people always say that. I'm sure you feel similarly. Like, traveling for a race or traveling for an event isn't necessarily tourism. If you're there to do a job or to do a race or to compete, your focus is on that. And I think from the outsider's perspective, that experience, they might feel like you're devaluing the experience of going to Asia or going to Africa or whatever. But I always defended it, at least from my own perspective, that I saw it through the only way I would have wanted to see it. Do you feel similarly when you go to a different continent and a new place?
I do, and it's so funny you bring that up, because that dynamic, I think, is unique to endurance athletes. When we travel somewhere, especially if we have an event in front of us, it's easier if you just show up, do the event, and then you have a couple weeks on the back end to kind of enjoy the recovery and tour and whatever. But it's always in the back of your mind, 24/7. Like, I got to do this. This race is coming up. I got to get this together. I got my I got to get this from my sponsor. I got to get this new pair of shoes. Whatever. With triathlons, the equipment itself is just it's a full-time job, just managing all of that and staying up on all the technology and everything else. Yeah, 100%. You mentioned a little bit about obviously your business acumen. You're very successful in the business world in San Francisco before you transitioned into running. Once you got your running career established, you started doing this, you started attracting sponsorship and this and that. Did running ever feel like a job to you? No, it hasn't. It still hasn't, even after all these decades. You hear about a lot from athletes about the lessons that from athletics that translate to business, but there's also lessons from business that translate to athletics, especially my career, because I realized very early on it doesn't matter if you're winning the Western States 100. At least back when I was doing it, you get a belt buckle like everyone else. There's no money in it. How are you going to keep the lights on? How are you going to put food on the table?
Sure.
So I realized you got to do something else to pay the bills, and if you can merge the two together, that's even better.
Sure. What were the main points that you focused on to supplement your ability to just run every day as a career, even though there wasn't money in it, like you said, but from a prize money perspective or whatever? Was it focusing on sponsorship? Were you immediately thinking, I've got to write a book? What were the main things that you were focusing on maybe in the early phases?
Yeah, I thought about the products I was using myself, and I thought these are the companies I want to approach because I like their stuff. I'm using it anyway. Yeah. Like Pedialyte. I don't know if you like Pedialyte. Is kind of like a thing now. When I first wrote about it, back in when I wrote my first book in 1992, no one was using Pedialyte as a electrolyte fuel for athletes. I mean, it was just for infants. My daughter had like jaundice, and we were giving her Pedialyte, and I thought, this tastes pretty good to me. Yeah. Seems like it's going to work. And so I started, I went to Pedialyte and I said, hey, let's do some sort of promotional thing. Storytelling. I'm Greek, we're storytellers. I mean, from Homer on. And I thought, anytime someone heard about me running 100 miles, they were fascinated by it. Yeah. You tell someone I ran a marathon. Nowadays, more people know about it. But before you say run a marathon, like I said to a cab driver one time, it was someone just broke 2 hours in the marathon, and he said, I can't believe it. That's so fast. That's incredible. How far is the marathon? Didn't even know. But when you say, hey, I just ran 100 miles, all of a sudden they get it. Like, oh my God, tell me about that. So I thought if you can tell this story, and if it can inspire people and keep someone's interest, maybe a book would be something that would sell. And my first book was like, I thought if I could give it to 10 of my buddies, if I could give it away, I'd be lucky. And then it sold millions of copies.
That's amazing. I literally have it written down in my show notes here saying that it's part of the professional athlete's job to be a storyteller. I believe that firmly. And so I think you've quite literally written the book on how to tell a story, how to get people engaged, how to get people to understand what you're going through and why this is unique and why it's something that they should maybe pay attention to. So that's very inspiring. Were you always on your own? Did you have a team that helped you creatively, or were all the ideas on the business side yours?
They were all mine.
Cool.
Some people say to me, God, you've got an incredible PR agency and this marketing machine. I'm like, moi. You're looking
Yeah.
at, no, I was with a couple agencies like CAA. I don't know if you these talent agencies. They handle like big name athletes. They so mismanage me. They don't get our world. Now they might more so, with the growth of endurance sports.
Sure.
But when I was back with them, they knew how to promote a basketball player, how to promote a football player. It was pretty straightforward. This guy who's doing 100-mile races, like, what do we do with this guy? Like, we don't even know how to put this together. So, yeah, I tried, and it just didn't work.
Yeah, I think you know yourself and you know your brand better than anyone else. And I think especially if ultra running, in 2005 was just getting off of the ground in terms of storytelling and publicity, there's probably no agency is gonna understand how to market that.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. I want to talk a little bit more about the books. So you said New York Times. I mentioned New York Times best-selling author. You sold millions of copies. How many books have you written now?
I've written 5, and I've co-authored 2.
Very cool. Yeah. Very cool. Did that process get easier or harder the more books that you've written?
It got harder because I realized what a shitty writer I was. My mom used to say to me that, the best writers are the best readers. So you got to read a lot to really be a good writer. And, when you're spending 6-7 hours a day training, when do you read?
Sure.
So I started listening to audiobooks. I probably have 500 audiobooks on my playlist. And I'd go running and listen to these books. And people say, it's not really authentic. It's, you're listening to it. But I remind them, like, the first words were not written. Like when Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, about Achilles and all these stories, these were oral traditions. So these were passed down orally. They weren't written down. So I don't think there's anything inauthentic about an audiobook. In fact, when I read a book and I listen to it, I have 2 different perspectives, which helps my writing. So my writing has gotten tougher because I'm a tougher critic now, and
Sure.
I hold myself to higher standards. But it's also gotten better. It's gotten better by that process.
Yeah, that's cool. I would love to get into a bit of writing. I feel like it would be hard for me, like I said, because my attention span, I always need to feel like I'm doing something. So maybe I'm going to have to steal the 12 to 14 minute hit routine to break it up a little bit. 45 minutes of writing, 15 minutes a hit, good to go.
Yeah, and I mean, when you're doing your runs, I don't do it when you're cycling, but when you're doing your running, think about, what would I write about? How would I start a book?
Sure.
You watch enough movies. What makes an exciting start? I mean, for me, the first sentence that I write has got to grab someone. 'Cause if you don't grab them in the first sentence, and I read so many books, unfortunately, by other endurance athletes where the first sentence is kind of kind of cliche. So I'm always looking to craft a first sentence that's very impactful. Yeah.
Sure. Do you feel like that's becoming harder with a new generation of people who are just wanting Instagram, TikTok, 30-second reads, short YouTube videos? Do you feel like books are harder to get people's attention? Is it harder to get a 20 to 40-year-old person now to read a book than it was 20 years ago?
It's funny you mention that because it became that way when social media first started taking off. It was really hard to sell books. Like booksellers were struggling. You saw Barnes and Noble went out of business, but it's come full circle. Now I have more kids, teenage kids that pick up my first book and they're like, oh God, I couldn't put that down. I read it in one night. That was brilliant. So I think more people it's kind of a backlash to this, Instagram society where, it's 5 to 6, I think you have 5 seconds to capture someone's interest on Instagram, or else they're going to, flip to the next, the next reel. But I think I'm selling more books than ever now. And I think it's just a backlash to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Like everything in life, there's going to be some cyclical nature to it where there's going to be a dip where people only want short form content. And then people are going to realize that's probably pretty shallow and isn't giving you the fulfillment that maybe a true story would. And I think that's where something like a book or a long form article or a magazine might make a bit of a resurgence. And if you're already seeing that now, I think that's only good for the betterment of society, endurance sports specifically. I'm curious to hear more about what you're excited about in the future. What do you have coming up, and what is kind of getting you out of bed in the morning? This idea of running from the lowest point to the highest point, and I've got a partner in crime to do this with me now. Cool. So it's that's been very helpful to re-inspire me, because it's difficult to pull these things off. So, like having these long-term goals in place, but also having, like, there's a 10K or a half marathon this coming weekend.
in Frisco, and I just happen to be in town. I'm going to jump into it and run it, So get some short-term fun things that are just, spur of the moment, spontaneous, as well as some long-term planning. Another book, all kinds of things. I mean, I started this running touring company called Greek Running Tours. I've noticed a big trend is athletes want to go somewhere and they don't want to just get on a tour bus or take a guided tour. They want to actually run.
Sure.
So it's a way to combine, and I'm saying running, I mean, it's jogging. Like you jog around Athens, you stop at historical places or cultural moments, but it's a way to tour on foot, and you kind of feel like you earned your dinner that night, you earned your glass of wine. Yeah, so
that's the best. That's the absolute best way. I say that, and that's part of what I was alluding to before, where my experience in seeing a city, if I go to Norway for 2 weeks, I'm exploring the city by doing a 10-mile run. Jogging around, I'm exploring the city by riding my bike 60 miles or whatever it might be. That's the most fulfilling way to see a place and whatever. So that's, again, businessman, you know what you're doing.
Foot tourism. Yeah, no. Check out Greek Running Tours. You got to come over. I mean, the tours are great. And I mean, there's massage services at night. It's world-class food. I mean, it's running, it's touring. It's exactly what you just described.
Sure. Yeah. You mentioned your partner who's in the room with us today. I'm curious to hear a little bit about your guys' dynamic. Training together? Do you train together? How does that work? Because I've got my perspective. I mentioned it on this podcast because my wife is also a professional triathlete, and so we have our own dynamic. But I'm curious to hear what yours is like.
I hope your wife is gentler than mine. She's a hard ass, and she rides me pretty good. But she's a great coach. She's a really great coach. She leads by example. Usually an example I can't follow, but I try my best. But it's really wonderful to be running with a female athlete that is so far superior to me. I mean, I'm a little bit older, I'll say that, but her ability and her strength astounds me. And it's inspirational to see someone running down a trail. I mean, I used to bound down trails. There was so much joy in that. And now it's kind of like, and to see her just, flying down a trail, it just reinvigorates me. Yeah.
That's really cool. Yeah, that's really cool. We've been together for 10 years now, and we've kind of tried to find that balance of training together, not training together, this and that. And so I think it's very rewarding when you can go to a race and, travel together and compete together, and also do some training. It's part of our life, I think, as endurance athletes.
But she's also a great outdoors person. So beyond just our training, we're going and bagging 14ers while we're here.
Cool.
She's running up. I'm fast hiking, but
nice.
We're getting after some adventure, not just training and training blocks.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. I have one more question here before I finish the podcast with some rapid fire questions. But is there anyone out there in endurance sports, in ultra running, even in a different walk of life, that is inspiring you right now?
Yeah, I mean, we talked a little bit about Dave Scott. I mean, he's transitioned from being, I would say, arguably the best triathlete in history, one of the best, into a business career. A guy named Tony Hawk. The Olympics are taking place right now.
Yeah.
The skateboarding is an Olympic sport.
Yeah.
I remember when Tony Hawk first came on the scene, and I was just like, this guy's going to make a living riding a skateboard? Like, how's that going to work? He's going to be bankrupt. And he's created an incredible brand, whatever. There's a guy named Laird Hamilton, who's a big wave surfer, and he tried to be on the professional surfing circuit. And, they're riding small little waves. He's a big guy, he's muscular, and they're riding small little waves and doing maneuvers. And he could, he's like, I had enough of this. I don't like it. I just want to go ride the biggest waves in the world. And he made a complete career out of it and just changed the whole landscape of surfing, into big wave riding. So these kind of guys that, didn't have they kind of wrote their own playbook, if you will. Yeah, they didn't have a roadmap to follow, and they created their own and were successful at it because they did what they loved.
You're one of those guys too. So you gotta throw yourself into that category, and the ability to continue to evolve as a person, as an athlete, as a businessman, I think is something that you've continuously done and you will continue to do because that's just in your DNA. So finish the podcast up here with some rapid fire questions. You ready?
I'm scared. Yeah.
No, there's some deep thinkers. They don't have to be rapid fire, but we'll just give it a shot here. So favorite place in the world to run?
Oh, Greece.
Okay.
Come on.
Anywhere in particular?
We live in a place called Penteli, which is a mountain where all the marble was harvested for the Acropolis.
Cool.
And when you run up to the very top of this mountain, you can see the Bay of Marathon. And that's literally where the Persians invaded Greece in 490 BC, where the marathon began. And just to look down upon it, and it hasn't changed, incredibly, in 2,500 years, it really hasn't changed that much. So to be up there and look at that and just think about, the history of the marathon and where it's been, it's just so fascinating to me. Yeah.
That's cool. If you can live in the place that is your favorite place to run and you're an ultra runner, that's probably a pretty good start. What was your longest travel day ever?
Probably to Uzbekistan. One time I traveled from New York to San Francisco to Seoul, South Korea, I think to Istanbul, and then to Uzbekistan. It was like a 48-hour total travel. Yeah, with like 5 different flights.
Gnarly. We've had a couple of those in our years where we're like, okay, we're going to central China. Let's book the cheapest ticket possible. And it's
you do not want to sit
6 legs on some airline you've never heard of before. So I always ask people who travel a lot for sport or for work, like, oh, what was your worst day?
Compression tights, right?
I know.
Oh, God.
Yeah, seriously. What is the oddest thing you've ever seen on the trail?
I was running a race in Australia, and as I'm running, this is like at mile 80 of a 100-mile race, this werewolf-looking creature comes out of the bushes. I mean, this dog, it was a dog. I think it was a dog. It was massive, and it's galloping. It's like a dog galloping at horse speed, and it's coming right for me, and I'm like, I'm going to die. And this thing just leaps over me, and there's this big lizard, like a huge lizard in the tree, and it grabs the lizard in its mouth.
Unbelievable. That's crazy.
And then it was gone. I'm like, what just happened? Yeah.
You're going to have that mental memory for like the rest of your life. Yeah, that is very cool. Only in Australia, too, you're going to have that one. What's your go-to food at an aid station when you've already bonked like 10 miles ago?
Oh, chocolate-covered espresso beans.
That's a solid move.
Those never wear off. Yeah,
that's a solid move.
Although I'll say that baklava,
Sure.
that's pretty good.
Yeah, plenty of sugar in that. That'll get you going.
The honey. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, honey, right. What is one essential item that you need with you on every run? And what's one thing that's not essential, but you kind of got to have it?
I really pride myself on not having anything, like not to lean on anything, just to be able to go run with nothing. So eyewear nowadays. I mean, I wear eyewear, so maybe a pair of sunglasses and a hat. Yeah. Just because, when you're around for 61 years, the sun kind of gets to you. So maybe sun protection.
Sure. That's a good answer.
Yeah. And then one thing that I definitely want to have, I don't know, the Cliff Shots, the blocks, the margarita flavor. Whoever invented those deserves a Nobel Prize. I mean, those never get old. Yeah,
totally.
Yeah, it's got all the electrolytes and margarita flavor. Come on,
you got to get your salt up. That's the key. Yeah, that's the key on the trail. All right, last one. The Olympics are going on, like you said. When you might be in your prime now. When you were in your ultra marathon running prime, if you had to choose a different sport, they said no more ultra marathon running, no more running. You have to be a pro in another sport in a year's time. What's your best shot?
I used to play volleyball, but I'm way too short for that. So I would say windsurfing. I used to be a professional windsurfer.
Oh, there you go.
So I'm still pretty competitive, and that's probably my best shot is windsurfing. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
And what's the other one where there's the puck and they push that thing down?
Oh, yeah, it's I know exactly what you're talking about.
And they take the brooms.
Yeah, totally. Curling. That's what it is, curling. Yeah. I was trying to think what mine was. I feel like maybe mine's like badminton or table tennis or something. Because I was like the table tennis and badminton champion.
You were?
Of my like little high school. We had a elite honors PE class, so it was like all the best athletes of the school, and I was won the badminton tournament. So
I think you think basketball. I mean, you're tall.
I don't know. I played a little bit of basketball, but I mean, not anywhere to be a pro. So I think a year's time, the badminton people are going to look at me and be like, "Dude, no shot." But that's what I always say.
You should say pickleball, because then you really are old.
Yeah, pickleball. Yeah. All right. Well, that's all I got for today. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Pleasure's mine.
Yeah. Appreciate it, and have a great time here in Colorado.
Down
Enjoy.
the trails,
Yeah, absolutely. Take care. That was a great conversation with Dean Karnazes. It was really cool to sort of branch out from sort of my normal realm and get to know somebody who's a legend in the ultra running community, just to not only learn more about ultra running, but just more about the endurance mindset. And there were so many similarities between the things he's gone through and what he continues to go through, and sort of what I go through and what ultra athletes and endurance athletes go through. So hope you enjoyed that, and we'll see you in the next episode. Peace.